Welcome, brave souls, to the realm of the unknown. Here in the heart of darkness, we unravel the chilling tales that lurk in the shadows, stories that will grip your imagination and chill you to the core. Prepare yourself for spine-tingling narratives that delve into the depths of fear, where every whisper holds a secret and every shadow conceals a terror. Join our community of thrill-seekers as we explore the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. But remember, once you enter, there's no turning back. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a moment of our haunting adventures. Are you ready to embrace the fear? The darkness awaits. Hiking can be peaceful or terrifying. Get ready for some hair-raising encounters that will haunt your next outdoor adventure. The mountains stood tall against the horizon. Jagged peaks pierced the sky, shrouded in an ethereal mist that whispered of secrets best left undisturbed. A blanket of silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. The forest, a sprawling expanse of ancient trees and hidden paths, seemed to stretch on forever. This was a place of raw, untamed beauty, where nature reigned supreme. Elena, an experienced hiker with a thirst for adventure, felt a shiver run down her spine as she gazed upon the imposing landscape. This was no ordinary trail. It was a journey into the unknown, a test of her limits. With a final glance back at the familiar world she was leaving behind, Elena stepped onto the trail. The path was narrow and overgrown, almost swallowed by the encroaching vegetation. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and shifted with every passing breeze. The forest welcomed her with an unsettling silence. The usual symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves was strangely absent, replaced by an unnerving quiet that pressed in on her from all sides. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The path beneath her feet grew steeper, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Elena found a small clearing near a stream and decided to set up camp for the night. As darkness enveloped the forest, the temperature plummeted, sending a chill down Elena's spine. The once comforting silence transformed into something sinister. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent her pulse racing. Exhaustion finally claimed her, and she drifted off to sleep, haunted by the unsettling feeling that she was not alone. The forest held its breath, waiting. A noise jolted her awake. It was a subtle sound, a soft rustling in the undergrowth just beyond the perimeter of her tent. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the stillness of the night. Elena's eyes flew open, instantly alert. The rustling sound came again, closer this time, like footsteps padding softly through the dry leaves. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. She was alone in the wilderness, miles from civilization. Every instinct screamed at her to get up, to run. She fumbled for her flashlight, her fingers trembling as she gripped the cold metal. The beam of light flickered to life, cutting through the darkness of the tent. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. Taking a deep breath, she unzipped the tent flap, the sound deafening in the quiet. The forest stood still, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the leaves. Shadows stretched and twisted, taking on menacing shapes in her imagination. Elena strained to listen, holding her breath, but the only sound was the gentle murmur of the nearby stream, a soothing counterpoint to the frantic beating of her heart. Had she imagined the noise? Was it just a small animal, foraging for food? The rational part of her mind tried to explain away the fear that tightened its grip on her throat. But deep down, a primal instinct whispered a warning. Something wasn't right. Elena stepped out of her tent, the cold night air biting at her skin. The flashlight beam danced across the trees, momentarily illuminating the darkness before being swallowed again by the shadows. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching her, waiting. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly in the stillness. The sound seemed to hang in the air, swallowed by the oppressive silence. There was no answer, only the echo of her own fear reverberating through the trees. She shone the flashlight in a wide arc, desperate to find a logical explanation for the noise that had awakened her. A fallen branch? A deer moving through the undergrowth? Her mind raced, conjuring up both rational explanations and terrifying possibilities. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Elena shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy that sent chills down her spine. She was alone in the wilderness, surrounded by darkness and the unknown. With a sigh that was half relief and half disappointment, Elena convinced herself it was just the wind or a small animal. She retreated into the tent, zipping it closed. Sleep eluded her as every sound heightened her senses. The forest felt alive, closing in on her. A whisper on the wind sent a shiver down her spine. Elena held her breath, straining to hear. The whisper came again, closer this time. It was like the forest itself was speaking to her. Terror surged through her. She scrambled for her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. As dawn painted the sky, the whispering faded. The rustling of leaves now seemed laced with menace. Elena emerged from her tent, her mind reeling. The forest appeared peaceful, but the fear lingered. She knew she was no longer alone. The rising sun, usually a welcome sight, did little to ease the knot of dread in Elena's stomach. The forest, bathed in the soft golden light, seemed to hold its breath, observing her every move. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind, each whisper, each rustle of leaves, amplifying her fear. Despite the terror that clawed at her, Elena knew she couldn't stay put. Staying put meant giving in to the fear, becoming another victim of the woods. She had to keep moving, had to find her way back to the familiar, to safety. As she hiked, the terrain grew increasingly difficult. The trail, barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves, wound its way through dense undergrowth and over treacherous, moss-covered rocks. The air hung heavy and humid, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. It was then that she saw it. A splash of color that stood out like a beacon against the muted greens and browns of the forest floor. A piece of fabric, ripped and faded, snagged on the thorns of a wild rosebush. As Elena drew closer, her blood ran cold. It was red. Red, like the setting sun. Red, like blood. A shiver ran down Elena's spine. She hadn't seen another soul since embarking on the trail. Whose fabric could it be? The question echoed in the silence of the forest, unanswered and ominous. Her mind raced, conjuring up images of lost hikers, of accidents, of something far more sinister. The fabric felt unsettlingly recent, the edges still sharp, the color vibrant. The forest seemed to press in on her, the air thick with an unseen menace. Elena forced herself to keep moving. Each step was an act of defiance against the growing fear that threatened to consume her. The forest, she realized, wasn't just watching her, it was toying with her, whispering doubts and fears into her mind. The sun, now directly overhead, offered little warmth as it struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above. The air grew heavier, more oppressive, with each passing hour. Elena's breath caught in her throat, her lungs struggling to draw in air. As dusk approached, painting the forest in long, eerie shadows, Elena stumbled upon a small clearing. Exhaustion, both physical and mental, weighed heavily upon her. She collapsed at the base of a towering oak, her body trembling with fatigue and fear. The familiar dread returned, amplified by the approaching darkness. The forest, she realized, was never truly silent. A symphony of unseen creatures filled the air with their nocturnal chorus, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl. And then she heard it, faint at first, barely audible above the symphony of the night. A whisper, her name carried on the wind. Elena. The blood drained from her face. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat a deafening roar in her ears. She strained to listen, her senses on high alert. The whisper came again, closer this time, laced with a chilling familiarity. "Elena, we know you're here." Panic seized her. The voice, no longer a whisper but a low, guttural growl, seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elena scrambled to her feet, her backpack half open, her breath coming in ragged gasps. There was no time to think, no time to rationalize. Survival instincts took over. She ran blindly through the darkening woods, her flashlight abandoned on the forest floor, the beam a beacon in the gathering darkness. Branches whipped at her face, thorns tore at her clothes, but she didn't dare slow down. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. Behind her she could hear the sounds of pursuit. The snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the heavy thud of footsteps that seemed to echo her own. But when she dared to glance back, there was nothing there. Nothing but the deepening shadows and the growing certainty that she was being hunted. The whisper, no longer a mere murmur on the wind, morphed into a chorus of voices, all chanting her name. Each syllable dripped with a sickening sweetness that sent shivers down her spine. The forest itself seemed to be closing in, the trees leaning towards her as if to bar her escape. Elena's breath hitched in her throat, her lungs burning with exertion. She risked a glance over her shoulder, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The beam of her discarded flashlight danced crazily in the distance, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and pulsed with an unnatural life of their own. A strangled sob escaped her lips as she stumbled over a gnarled root, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg, but she couldn't stop, not now. The whispers were getting closer, their tone shifting from seductive whispers to guttural growls filled with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. She pushed herself back onto her feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in her ankle, desperation lending her a burst of speed. The forest floor was a treacherous obstacle course of tangled roots and loose rocks, but she didn't dare slow down, not even for a second. The whispers were upon her now, hot and fetid in her ears, their words a jumble of threats and promises, all designed to break her spirit. She could almost feel their presence, cold and ethereal, brushing against her skin like cobwebs. The forest floor seemed to tilt and sway beneath her feet, the trees blurring into an indistinguishable mass of darkness. She was running blind, her lungs screaming for air, her legs heavy with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. To stop was to surrender, to become another victim of the hungry darkness that consumed this place. As she burst into a small clearing, bathed in the pale glow of the moon, Elena dared to hope. Hope that she had outrun them, that the whispers would fade into the night, leaving her in peace. But as she stumbled to a halt, her breath ragged in her throat, she saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its limbs elongated and distorted, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. And then it smiled. The smile. It wasn't human, not in any way that Elena could comprehend. It was a grotesque parody of a smile, a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-like teeth that seemed to gleam in the moonlight. Terror, raw and primal, surged through her, momentarily paralyzing her. Her legs felt like lead, her body refusing to obey the commands of her panicked mind. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, frozen in the face of this nightmare. But as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, melting back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The whispers, too, faded into the night, leaving behind an echoing silence that was somehow more terrifying than the cacophony that had preceded it. Elena collapsed to the ground, her body racked with sobs. She curled into a fetal position, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her forehead pressed against the cold, damp earth. The forest floor, usually a source of discomfort, now offered a strange comfort, a tangible reminder that she was still alive, still human. She had to get out of here. She had to get back to civilization, to safety. But which way was safety? She had lost all sense of direction. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the dense canopy, Elena forced herself to stand. Her body ached, but she knew she couldn't stay here. To stay here was to invite madness. She took a step forward, then another, her ears straining for the slightest sound. The forest now held nothing but terror for her. Every rustle of leaves sent shivers down her spine, her mind conjuring up images of the shadowy figure. She had to escape this nightmare. But even as she ran, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was against her, that it would never let her go. The whispers, she realized with a growing sense of dread, hadn't stopped. They had just become a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. Elena stumbled through the unforgiving wilderness, her lungs burning her legs, screaming for respite. The forest floor, a treacherous maze of gnarled roots and hidden hollows, offered no mercy. Each step was a gamble, a desperate lunge for survival. The whispers pursued her relentlessly, slithering through the trees with an unnerving sentience. They were no longer just voices. They were the forest itself, mocking her fear, reveling in her desperation. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into an eternity of fear and exhaustion. The sun, a hazy orb glimpsed through the dense canopy, offered no warmth, no comfort. It was a malevolent eye watching her every move, marking her progress towards either salvation or oblivion. Every shadow seemed to hold the promise of the shadowy figure. Its grotesque smile burned into her memory. The forest was no longer a place of natural beauty. It was a hunting ground, and she was the prey. Elena's body screamed for rest, but her mind, fueled by adrenaline and terror, refused to surrender. She pushed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to escape the clutches of the nightmare that had ensnared her. The whispers, once distant murmurs, now pressed in on her, wrapping around her like icy fingers. They taunted her with her fear, whispered doubts in her ear, eroded her sanity with each passing moment. She stumbled to a halt beside a stagnant pool of water, her reflection staring back at her, a hollow mockery of the strong, confident woman she once was. The whispers seemed to emanate from the murky depths, echoing her own thoughts back at her, twisted and grotesque. "Give up!" they hissed, their voices a chorus of despair. "There's no escape! You're ours now!" The first light of dawn, filtering through the trees in pale fingers of gold, brought with it a flicker of hope. A false dawn. The whispers had receded, their grip on her sanity loosening with the coming of the day. Elena stumbled into a small clearing, the ground carpeted in a thick layer of dew-kissed leaves. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if the night had purged the forest of its darkness. But the terror lingered, a cold knot of dread in the pit of her stomach. She sank down at the base of a towering oak, its ancient branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. Her body ached, her muscles screamed for respite, but a new resolve steeled her. She had survived the night. She would find her way out of this. But even as the thought formed in her mind, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faintest whisper, a single word, chilling in its clarity. Run. Panic surged through her, a raw, primal instinct that bypassed all rational thought. She didn't need to see, didn't need to know, she just needed to run. She fled through the trees, her lungs burning, her legs a blur of motion. The forest floor, no longer a source of terror, became an ally, each root, each fallen branch guiding her flight. But the forest was relentless. It closed in around her, the trees pressing forward, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. The air grew thick and heavy, the light fading, as if the forest itself was drawing breath, preparing to swallow her whole. And then, silence. The whispers ceased, the pursuit ended. Elena stumbled to a halt, her chest heaving, her mind reeling. She had escaped, or had she? As she turned, slowly, fearfully, she realized the horrifying truth. She was no longer lost in the wilderness. The wilderness was now a part of her. The forest had claimed its due. Days later, or perhaps it was only hours, time had become fluid, meaningless in her ordeal. Elena stumbled out of the woods. She was a ghost of her former self, her clothes ripped and mud-caked, her body a tapestry of bruises and scratches, but she was alive. The sight of the ranger station, a small wooden structure that had never seemed so welcoming, brought tears to her eyes. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the world she feared she had left behind forever. She had no memory of the intervening time, only a series of fragmented images, running, falling, the whispers swirling around her like angry hornets. The forest had released her, but its mark remained, etched deep within her psyche. The ranger, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much, listened patiently as Elena recounted her tale. He didn't interrupt, didn't scoff at her ramblings, but a shadow crossed his face, a flicker of recognition that sent a chill down her spine. "You're not the first," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "This forest, she has a way of testing people. Some folks, they come back different. Some, they don't come back at all." He spoke of strange occurrences, of whispers on the wind, of shadowy figures glimpsed through the trees. Local legends, he called them, tales spun by campfire light to ward off the darkness. But Elena saw the truth in his eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that some legends were rooted in something far more ancient, far more sinister. He pointed to a map on the wall, a worn and faded thing crisscrossed with hiking trails. His finger hovered over a spot deep within the forest, a place marked by a cluster of red pins. "That's where you were," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's where they usually go missing." Elena shivered, a cold dread settling in the pit of her stomach. She had escaped the forest, but had it truly let her go? Or was she forever tethered to that place, haunted by the whispers that now echoed in her dreams? Elena left the forest behind, but it never truly left her. The whispers lingered, faint echoes in the stillness of the night, reminders of the darkness that lurked just beyond the fringes of her sanity. She tried to forget, to bury the memories deep within her subconscious, but the forest held fast, its grip tightening with each passing day. It was in the rustling of leaves outside her window, in the shadows that danced at the edge of her vision, in the sudden, inexplicable chills that ran down her spine. The forest remembered, and it would never let her forget. The video ends with a black screen and a final chilling whisper. Elena.
The shadows are restless tonight, and so are we. If you're brave enough, hit that like button. Let us know what you think in the comments, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories that lurk just around the corner.